What made you choose Elon Musk, and how'd you get him to agree?
What did you learn that we didn't already know about Elon Musk?
This is going to be a fun ride.
Walter Isaacson.
Walter Isaacson is here.
He has written critically acclaimed biographies on Ben Franklin, Albert Einstein,
Steve Jobs, Da Vinci, and Einstein.
He has been chairman of CNN and managing editor of Time magazine.
One of the greatest biography writers ever.
Almost all the people I've written about who are disruptors, they tend to have had demons driving them. But for Elon Musk, it was particularly brutal. He's addicted to drama. He's addicted to risk. There's certainly multiple Elon Musk, multiple personalities, but also there's almost a demon mode where he turns really dark. You don't want to be around him when he's in demon mode. It's really frightening, but demon mode is what gets shit done.
You said Elon was a good student, but not fantastic.
A scrawny kid on the autism spectrum, no friends, beaten up quite often, but the scars from that were minor compared to what happened when he went home. A man with a knife sticking out of his head, and they step into the pool of blood, and it's sticky on their souls. This causes scars that last the rest of your life. It took a year of traveling around with Elon Musk before I could get him to open up about his father. And then it started coming out.
Elon's father raised a stepdaughter and then had 2 kids with
the stepdaughter, yes. And so that really messed up Elon's mind. Musk is driven by mission more than any person I've ever seen. You care too much about whether the people working with you love you. That's not the way to create a disruptive organization.
Is he happy?
To understand anything about Elon Musk, we must understand his thought process, his fundamental way of problem solving that allows him to achieve the unachievable. There are, in fact, identifiable patterns in his method. An algorithm, as Walter calls it, enables him to operate on a different plane. This unique mode of thinking may hold the key to understanding Musk's success, and perhaps even provide insight for unlocking our own undiscovered potential. So, what is the algorithm?
The algorithm is a 5-step process for not only making good products and designing good projects, but manufacturing them. And you're right, it begins with first principles. He says, question every requirement. And by first principles, he means look down at the physics. If somebody says, no, we can't build it at this price, he says, tell me how much the materials cost, tell me exactly what's involved here, and then tell me you can or can't do it. When he first was trying to buy a rocket booster in Russia early on, and they were charging him $15 million or something, on the flight home, he calculated how much is the cost of materials and fuel, and he said, okay, those are the first principles. So we should be able to make it at a much cheaper cost. With the algorithm, he's always saying, question every requirement, and then delete, delete, delete. So he simplifies things. And then, only then do you start to speed up the manufacturing process and eventually automate it. One of his big mistakes at Tesla was he went to automation too quickly before he had deleted every part and questioned every requirement. It's not just the algorithm, it's the algorithmic way of thinking, which is the manufacturing matters as much as the design of the product. So he puts his engineers and designers with their desks facing the assembly line. So every hour they can watch if there's a holdup, if there's something that's a piece of, strip around the headlight or wiring in the Raptor engine that's causing a holdup in the manufacturing process. The engineers and designers can see it every hour, which is why he doesn't do what most automakers now do, which is send something off and outsource all the manufacturing. He's got to watch it happen.
The algorithm is what he lives his life by. However, to explore the algorithm, Musk must rely on his personality. A combination of machine thinking and human instinct is what's needed to succeed. How successfully does Musk manage this? To answer this question, we need to first understand where he is getting inputs for the way he's making his business decisions.
Yeah, he processes information from all over the place, canvasses the world on Twitter, puts up polls and things.
If you're talking to Elon or you want to have a conversation with Elon and you get that opportunity to talk to Elon, you need to be concise, quick.
And sometimes you have no idea that he's getting feedback. He's not very good at getting pushback from people around him. He can bristle. But he batch processes it, which means it takes a while. You watch him process something, and then he'll switch course on a lot of things.
One of the principles of kind of the way he operates is that it's totally fine with being wrong as long as you're upfront about what you aren't sure of. But his intense way of dealing with people makes some staff scared to bring him bad news when things go south.
I think that's one of his problems, is people sometimes are afraid to tell him the bad news, and then he keeps pushing at them and saying, get the bad news out there often, get it out there first. And people like Mark Jankosa, one of the sidekicks he has at SpaceX, who's been with him a long time, whenever you're at a meeting with him, he's forcing the people at the meeting to give the bad news first. And so those who succeed around Musk are those who figure out you got to give them the bad news, even if it's going to result in some unpleasant scenes. On the other hand, after a while, the people who have worked with him a long time know how to turn him around, and eventually he processes the information and does it. For example, he always was against building the cheap global car, the $25,000 car. He wanted to do a robo-taxi, but he wanted it to have no steering wheel. And they kept saying, no, we have to do one for now, that'll be good. About 4 or 5 months ago, there's a meeting, and once again they present him with this, you gotta have the next generation $25,000 car, and you gotta have it have a steering wheel. He says, okay, let's do it.
A guy like this has trouble with being patient, but at least he can be reasoned with. That doesn't solve the issue, however. I mean, what happens when there's something really crazy he needs to do, and because of who he is, he can just go and do it.
Which is just last Christmas, not too long ago. He was at Twitter headquarters, and he looks at all the engineering things, and they have 3 server farms, one in Portland, one in Sacramento, and one, I think, in Atlanta. And he does the calculus in his head, and he said, we don't really need 3 different redundant server farms. And the engineers say, well, yes, we do, because we need backups and we need caching or whatever. And he says, no, you're not going back to first principles thinking. If you look at this, anyway, he decides they should get rid of the servers in Sacramento. Well, they say, fine, but that'll take 6 months. He said, no, you can do it in 6 weeks. And the engineers, and I'm sitting there in the meeting, and he's getting really dark, and they don't know how to deal with him, because this is like a month after he took over Twitter, so they don't know this dude. And they're saying, well, no, I'm sorry, Elon, we can't do it. And he'd say, you can do it in 6 weeks. And by the end of the meeting, he said, you can do it in 6 days. He gets really dark, and he decides he's going to fire them. But it's December 23rd, so it's like 2 days before Christmas. He does fire them, but the next day, Christmas Eve, he's flying from San Francisco to Austin, Texas to go home for Christmas. He's with 2 young cousins on the plane who are engineers, and one of them says, why don't we just take those servers out ourselves? Elon Musk makes a U-turn in his airplane, tells the pilot to go to Sacramento. They were already over Nevada. They land. He rents, there are like 4 of them on the plane. They rent a truck, a sort of what we call a U-Haul truck, a rental truck. And they go to the server facility, and the guard there is like flummoxed. It's Christmas Eve, and they're forcing their way in, and they're looking at the servers, and one of the engineers says, well, we can't take them out because we need engineers to take off these elevated floors, those floor tiles where people. And Musk turns to his bodyguard and says, do you got a pocket knife? The guy goes, yeah. And he takes a pocket knife and pulls up one of the vents, rips up the floor thing, goes underneath the floor panel with a set of wire cutters that he got from Home Depot, and cuts the cable to the servers. And they start moving them out and put them in the U-Haul truck. And this is Musk and by the way, it's typical of Musk because it works fine for a few days. Then you can see the service getting a bit degraded, but then eventually it comes back. And he says, you got to take risks. If you're not sort of causing 20% of the problems from the risks you take, you're not taking enough risk. But there it is, and they got rid of that server farm in Sacramento.
20% is a recurring figure with Musk. He was insisting, for example, that software managers should spend at least that percentage of time coding. Is it a coincidence that he wanted to charge users of X a $20 fee? That figure will come up in this video again, listen out for it. Yet, effective leadership requires more than numerical benchmarks. Identifying talent and empowering the right teams constitutes another vital pillar of Musk's success.
I mean, there's a pretty concrete and rigorous set of ideas based on which the hiring is done.
Oh, yeah, and he has a very good, spidey, intuitive sense, just looking at people who could, not looking at them, but studying them, who could be good. One of his ways of operating is what he calls a skip level meeting. And let's take a very specific thing, like the Raptor engine, which is powering the Starship. And it wasn't going well. It looked like a spaghetti bush, and it was going to be hard to manufacture. And he got rid of the people who were in charge of that team. And now remember that he spent a couple of months doing what he calls skip level, which means instead of meeting with his direct reports on the Raptor team, he would meet with the people one level below them. And so he would skip a level and meet with them. And he said, and I just ask them what they're doing, and I drill them with questions. And he said, this is how I figure out who's going to emerge. But I watched as a young kid, dreadlocks, named Jacob McKenzie, he's in the book, is sitting there, engineering mindset, speaks in a bit of a monotone. Musk would ask a question and he would give an answer, and the answer would be very straightforward, and he didn't, get rattled. He was like this. And Musk said one day, called him up at 3 a.m., well, I won't say 3 a.m., but after midnight, said, you still around? Yeah, Jake said, yeah, I'm still at work. And he said, okay, I'm going to make you in charge of the team building Raptor. And that was like a big surprise. But Jacob McKenzie has now gotten a version of Raptor, and they're building them at least one a week, and they're pretty awesome. That's where his talent, Musk's talent, for finding the right person and promoting them, that's where it is.
Amazing that despite his mercurial nature, Musk can just zero in on one person and turn their life around. But once Musk puts together his squad, he works them hardcore, not letting up one bit. Where Twitter used to talk about psychological safety and work-life balance, Musk ain't having any of that Zen stuff. He wants full-on urgency, with crews ready to grind 24/7 to reach his goals.
One night in South Texas at the launch pad of SpaceX, it's a Friday night at 10 p.m. and everything's going smoothly. There's no launches being scheduled, and he looks, and there's only 2 people working at the launch pad. And all of a sudden I see demon mode coming in, almost like storm clouds from the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm thinking, well, it's Friday night at 10 p.m. And yet he just reams out this guy named Andy, who was in charge of the launch pad site. And he orders a surge. He orders 100 people to come in from different parts of SpaceX, from Florida, California, so they can all work for 24 hours a day getting this thing done, even though there was no need to.
When he went into Twitter, one of the very alarming things that he did was there was rumors that he called everyone up to the top floor and said, this is going to be the new company culture. If you don't like it, go
Absolutely.
home.
I was there. I walked in with, I was there the day before he took over. He marches in. And I think there's two extremes of doing a company. One was the way Twitter was, which is nurturing and sweet and having yoga rooms and artisanal coffee bars. And when Musk walks in, they're showing him how we have quiet spaces for people who need, to get their mental energy restored. And they said, we value psychological safety. And Musk looked at me and kind of did his raspy laugh, says, psychological safety, blank, screw that. An urgent intensity is our operating principle. Psychological safety is our enemy. And so he turns it into a hardcore, all-in environment where you have to say, I'm all in. You're going to work 24/7, some weekends, because you're all in. And he said, I want a team that's 20% of the size, but that's an order of magnitude more intense and more all in.
Musk is all about hardcore intensity. He shreds any talk of work-life balance as weak sauce and doubles down on urgency 24/7 as the way to go. But his relentless pace burns plenty of people out, making you wonder if he just ditches empathy for disruption.
And there are times when Musk very much has a lack of empathy. He says sometimes not having too much empathy can be beneficial, because he'll talk about John McNeil, who had been president of Tesla. And John McNeil always wanted the people in front of him to like him. He was always very kind, which meant that he didn't fire people. He wasn't tough enough on them. So sometimes, Steve Jobs said this to me as well, if you're somebody who's going to wear velvet gloves and not tell people something they're doing is wrong and not say it tough enough, you'll never get things going.
Both Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, what was their view on being liked as a leader?
Both of them told me that could be a failing, that could be a weakness, which is if you try too hard to be liked, you're not going to be disruptive enough. Musk even said empathy and collegiality can be your enemy. Jobs told me, you think you're very empathetic and you care about other people's feelings, but sometimes you take it too far and you do it out of vanity. You want people to like you. You care too much about whether the people working with you love you. And he said, that's not the way to create a disruptive organization. I remember him yelling at some of his finance people who were friendly with some of the engineers and said, no, collegiality is your enemy. You do not want them to like you. You're there to challenge them. If they like you too much, you're not doing your job.
But do Elon's employees like him?
Elon's employees generally will walk through a wall for him, those who have survived, whether it be Gwen Shotwell or who is the president of SpaceX, or people, Mark Juncosa, or the people at Tesla like Drew Baglino or Franz von Holzhausen. But he burns out people pretty fast. So if he's in an organization, after a few years, maybe 20% are totally loyal and survive, but he's not afraid of burning people out and having them leave.
Interesting how Walter Isaacson estimates that 20% of Musk's workforce are loyal. I wonder if Musk ever regrets pushing everyone so hard and using shock tactics instead of a more caring approach.
And I've seen Musk talk to the people at SpaceX late at night, maybe midnight, where they're all still working at the launch pad of the factory. And he'll say, I know how hard you're working, but this is the most exciting job you could possibly have. It's the most exciting, important job on Earth, which is getting people to Mars. Whatever is the second most exciting, you can't even think of it, what it is, because this is by far the most exciting thing you could be doing.
Musk is juggling a million make-or-break missions at once. So what's his secret sauce for hyper-focus with the world blowing up around him? How does he manage his time?
Well, Musk is in a league of his own in the way he does it. First of all, Steve Jobs had to run Pixar and Apple for a while. But Musk, every couple of hours, is switching his mindset from how to implant the Neuralink chip and what will the robot that implants it in the brain look like and how fast can we make it move, and then the heat shield on the Raptor, or switching to human imitation, machine learning, full self-drive. On the night that the Twitter board agreed to the deal, this is huge around the world. I'm sure you remember, like Musk buys Twitter. It wasn't when the deal closed. It was when the Twitter accepted his offer. And I thought, okay. But then he went to Boca Chica, to South Texas, and spent time fixating on, if I remember correctly, a valve in the Raptor engine that had a methane leak issue. And what were the possible ways to fix it? And all the engineers in that room, I assume, are thinking about, this guy just bought Twitter. Should we say something? Yeah. And then he goes with Kimball to a roadside joint in Brownsville and just sits in the front and listens to music with nobody noticing really him being there. One of the things that's one of his strengths and sort of weaknesses in a way is in a given day, he'll focus serially, sequentially on many different things. He will worry about uploading video onto X.com or the payment system, and then immediately switch over to some issue with the FAA giving a permit for Starship, or with how to deal with Starlink and the CIA. And when he's focused on any of these things, you cannot distract him. It's not like he's also thinking about, I'm dealing with Starlink, but I've got to also worry about the Tesla decision on the new $25,000 car. Now, he'll, in between these sessions, process information, then let off steam. For better or worse, he lets off steam by either playing a friend in Polytopia or fire off some tweets, which is often not a healthy thing. But it's a release for him. And he doesn't, I once said he was a great multitasker, and that was a mistake. People corrected me. He's a serial tasker, which means focuses intensely on a task for an hour and then focuses on the next task.
With so many huge companies now counting on him for breakthroughs, can Musk really keep a controlling hand directly on the wheel of each one? You'd think he's got to start handing off more power to people he trusts at some point. But Will he loosen his grip enough to let others take the driver's seat more?
Do you see him moving into a new era where he's essentially seeding a bunch of ideas, almost a Thomas Edison character, putting money towards bigger ideas and letting smart people invent it? Or is he going to keep control like a Henry Ford back in the day of making sure the Model T was the Model T for as long as possible?
Well, I think one of his weaknesses, I'll call it, is he really is a control freak. You want him to give up control. Say of Twitter, you're thinking, okay, Linda Yaccarino should run it. But he doesn't really cede too much control. Gwen Shotwell at SpaceX learns how to deal with him. He really is focused on the product. She gets to run the company. But no, I don't see him giving up a lot of control over these companies, even though there are now 6 or 7 of them, depending on how you count, that he's running.
Where does this control freakery come from? Isaacson has some thoughts.
About Elon really stood out to me. I forget who it's from, but inside the man, he's still there as a child, the child standing in front of his dad.
That was Tallulah, his second wife, and she's great. She's an English actress. They've been married twice, actually. And Tallulah said that's just him from his childhood. He's a drama addict. Kimball says that as well. I asked why, and Tallulah said, for him, love and family are kind of associated with those psychological torments. And in many ways, he'll channel. Tallulah would be with him in 2008 when the company was going bankrupt, or whatever it may have been, or later. And he would be so stressed he would vomit. And then he would channel things that his father had said, use phrases his father had said to him. And so she told me, deep inside the man is this man-child still standing in front of his father.
You write that the PTSD from his childhood also instilled in him an aversion to contentment. You quote Grimes, who's the mother of 3 of his children, and one of his former wives, about this kind of issue that he has. What do you think that means for the companies that he runs? What does that mean for the people that work for him as they try to reach the goals and sometimes achieve those goals?
He's addicted to drama. He's addicted to risk. And whenever things seem to be going smoothly, he almost has a compulsion to stir things up. I've watched it happen a dozen times, whether it's standing on a roof late at night where they're installing the Tesla solar roof, and he just says, okay, we're going to have a surge, and he disrupts the whole thing. He disrupted full-service driving a few months ago, and I was there, which is, no, we're going to make it based on artificial intelligence and machine learning, not on coding. So it allows him to become a disruptive figure, but also a difficult leader.
As Elon hustles us closer to some sci-fi future, we have to wonder, what personal pains or voids might be driving this non-stop push forward? To really get what shaped his hardcore style as a leader, we need to look at his early experiences growing up. How much of who Musk is today traces back to old scars from his childhood that still ache?
What was the early days of Elon Musk like?
He was a scrawny kid, socially awkward, beaten up on the playground a whole lot. Went to a wilderness camp in which, sort of survival. And he lost 10 pounds in a week because they kept beating him up and taking his food. But when he went back to the wilderness camp a few years later, he had gotten bigger, he had learned a little judo, and he said, I just learned to punch people in the nose as hard as I could when they were being mean to me. And sometimes they'd beat me up, but if I punched them really hard in the nose, they wouldn't do it again. You almost see that nowadays, which is he's pugnacious. He sometimes can be so confrontational, and when in doubt, he punches in the nose.
Those memories can drive even big shot adults, but when your dad is your main bully, that's got to do a number on you.
It took a long time for Musk to want to talk about his childhood. I just sat there, I'd raise it every now and then, and sometimes we'd get to a place where suddenly he'd start talking about his father, and he would get teary-eyed at times, very, very emotional, and just say, you don't know how bad the abuse was. And I talked, of course, to Kimball Musk, his brother, about it, and Mae Musk, his mother. But then I talked to Elon Musk, the father. I wanted to hear all sides of this. And after a while, Elon just kept opening up about the psychological scars he had when his father would make him stand in front of his father and yell at him for more than an hour and take the sides of the people who had beaten up Elon and call Elon stupid.
How does someone bounce back from that? And what happens inside when the past won't let go? That's when demons manifest themselves.
What is demon mode in your mind?
Demon mode is something that happened to his father as well. It's almost like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where a cloud comes over and he gets into a trance and he can just be tough in a cold way. He never gets really angry, never gets that physical, but coldly brutal to people. And he almost doesn't remember afterwards what he's done. Sometimes I'll say, why did you say that to that person? And he'll look at me blankly as if he didn't quite remember what happened while he was in demon mode. And his father says, it happens to me, meaning the father. He says, and I can't help it. It just happens. And likewise, it happens to Elon. That's not to excuse it, sure, but he hardly remembers that he's done it. I remember once late at night, and Grimes was there. She leaned over to me and said, demon mode. And I didn't see it yet, but she knew it was about to happen, like somebody can feel the change in pressure. And boom, about a minute later, he got really dark. So it's like being somebody who has multiple personalities at times. Sometimes he'll be giddy and funny and pulling out his phone and making you watch a Monty Python clip about silly walks while he's doing Optimus the Robot. But then he can switch quickly to being engineering mode, or sometimes being inspirational, and sometimes being very dark. One of the things that Claire Boucher, known as Grimes, says is you don't want to be around him when he's in demon mode. It's really frightening, she said. But she added, but demon mode is what gets shit done.
What does Elon think of his father? Did you speak to him directly about him?
Yes, he doesn't speak to his father anymore, of course, and it's a very brutal relationship. He's still rattled by the memory of it. His father has had 2 children by a young woman that he had raised as a stepdaughter, and so that really messed up Elon's mind.
Elon's father raised a stepdaughter and then had 2 kids with
the stepdaughter, yes. And so and he's talked about it. Elon Musk also is an astonishingly good engineer who gave many good things in childhood. He was at times successful, at times less so, but he also instilled some of these demons. So it's the most complex relationship. Barack Obama begins one of his memoirs by saying, I think every successful man is either trying to live up to the expectations of his father or live down the sins of his father. And Obama says, in my case, it's both. Well, in Elon's case, it's both.
While Elon's relationship with his father was complex and impacted him greatly, what shaped him into the focused, driven innovator he is today? When did his intense interest in computers, video games, and programming first emerge? Was Elon always an exceptional student, or did he struggle in certain areas while excelling in others?
Elon was a good student, but not fantastic.
Yeah, even in South Africa and at boys' school. And then when he goes to college, his SATs are fine, but they're not all 800. But he had an intense focus. So when he focused on something, he would be awesomely smart. Problem is, he doesn't like things that don't interest him. So when he had to learn Afrikaans in school and, he flunks it, or when he has to learn certain things. But when it came to engineering, especially material science, he could focus like a laser on the properties of materials or engineering problems. He grew up at that time that I can remember, and you can't, where computers suddenly pop up. Mm-hmm. You can have your own computer. And that's one of the things Steve Jobs and Bill Gates brought us to, which is, a computer you can actually plug in and have at home and code on. Well, he got one and taught himself C++. At age 12 or 13, coded his own video game called Blastar, which he published. And he becomes addicted to 2 things. 1 is computers and 2 is video games.
Did you spoke to his mother quite a lot?
Yeah, still do. She's very much around.
What did she think of him at that age when he's 11, 12? Did she think he was a genius?
Yes. She, for better or worse, was not a doting mother, was not somebody hovering all the time, but was, when Elon was 5 or 6 years old, she decided he was a genius and used to fight with the schools when the schools would sometimes say he's not doing well in school. And he'd be distracted. He's always looking out of the window and staring blankly. And she would say, because he's a genius and you're not challenging him enough. And I think she still feels he's a genius.
He ends up leaving South Africa and studies physics and business at the same time. And I thought it was so fascinating that the reason why he took up business, which is quite rare for someone to do physics and business, I think.
He said he didn't want to end up working for somebody who studied business and didn't understand the science. And he felt that if he didn't understand the business side, he'd end up having to work for somebody else.
Since boyhood, sci-fi filled his dreams. Like Tony Stark drawing up fantastic inventions, he pictured alien worlds, futuristic tech. As an adult, these visions blended with his identity and innovations. His companies use names, logos from childhood comic books. He talks a grand, messianic talk about space, AI, and saving the world. Does he follow some fantasy of playing the superhero? Or does a noble wish to progress humanity actually drive him?
He's somewhat self-aware, but he does have an epic, hero complex of which he's some comic book character wearing his underpants on the outside trying to save the world. And that can be worrisome at times.
I mean, one of the things about him is that he has acquired a lot of power, right? He's the world's richest man. He is changing industries. Mm-hmm. And you see over time that some people rise into power and maybe they want to use it with velvet gloves or in the background. They don't necessarily want to, have their footprints over things, where he has no objection to everyone knowing that he's doing what he's doing. Do you think there's something different about that? Does it get back to that original idea of punching somebody in the nose so they know that he's willing to punch them?
I think it gets back to a scrawny kid, getting beaten up on the playground and then hiding in the corner of a bookstore reading the comic books of the superheroes. And he really did develop a sense of mission, a mission that we should become spacefaring and go to Mars, a mission that we should move to the era of electric vehicles, that we have to tame robotics and artificial intelligence. And I think he sees himself as truly driven by these epic missions. Musk is driven by mission more than any person I've ever seen. And it's not only mission, it's like cosmic missions, meaning he's got three really big missions. One is to make humans a spacefaring civilization, make us multiplanetary, or get us to Mars. Number two is to bring us into the era of sustainable energy, to bring us into the era of electric vehicles and solar roofs and battery packs. And third is to make sure that artificial intelligence is safe and is aligned with human values. And every now and then I'd talk to him and we'd be talking about Starlink satellites or whatever, or he would be pushing the people in front of him at SpaceX and saying, if you do this, we'll never get to Mars in our lifetime. And then he would give the lecture how important it was for human consciousness to get to Mars in our lifetime. And I'm thinking, okay, this is the pep talk of somebody trying to inspire a team, or maybe it's the type of pontification you do on a podcast. But on like the 20th time I watched him, I realized, okay, I believe it. He actually is driven by this.
You talk about mission, and some of his key supporters have been frustrated with him because they bought into the mission of Tesla, they bought into the mission of SpaceX, but then they see him with Twitter, now known as X, and they wonder why he's putting his time there. What was your takeaway? Was it because he wants to own the playground, as you kind of suggested, or was it just impulse?
It was impulse to buy Twitter. It's because he wants to own the world's great playground. It's also because 20 years earlier he had created a company called X.com, which became PayPal, and he wanted it to become both a financial system connected to a social network and everything app. And he sees Twitter turned into X being something that can fulfill that vision. When I started the book, I thought, okay, man, this is somebody who's shooting up rockets and he can make them land and get things in orbit. Nobody else can do it. He's also learned how to do manufacturing, which nobody's been able to do recently. He's also brought us into batteries and electric vehicles that can sell 1 million a year. And I thought, this is going to be a fun, rollicking book about some great technology. But yeah, then Twitter comes along, and for that matter, artificial intelligence, where he summons me last March back to Austin and says, I'm going to start a company to do AI. So this is a guy who can't leave well enough alone.
One thing about Musk is that, unlike many other world-defining figures, you have a sort of direct access to his thought process through X. Buying Twitter on impulse made people wonder, was Elon losing focus on his missions to change the world? If SpaceX and Tesla weren't enough, what other huge goals fill his brilliant mind? His drive compares to legends like Howard Hughes. But will Hughes's sad end happen to Elon too?
When I first got hired by SpaceX, we did an interview with 60 Minutes. And they interviewed Elon and myself. And Scott Pelley was the anchor. He talked to us, and he said to me, "Why did you leave NASA and come work for SpaceX? You had like the best gig in the world, you know, going up on rockets and stuff. Why would you do that?" And I said, "Well, if you can go back in time and you were a young engineer and you had the opportunity to like get in on the ground floor and work with Howard Hughes when he was like doing all the crazy stuff he was doing in his day, wouldn't you want to be a part of that?" And Scott Pelley looked at me like with a deer in the headlights look, because I don't think he knew what I was talking about. But I was like, but then I realized as soon as I said that, like, oh my God, I just made a terrible strategic error. I compared my boss to Howard Hughes, and, you know, things didn't end up that well for Howard, you know.
He went crazy, right?
He went kind of crazy. He became
washed his hands too much and
germaphobe. He was peeing in jars, and like his fingernails grew out like.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, I really kind of stepped in it, right? So you don't want to say that about the boss,
right?
So it took a while. It was like months later. We were driving in a rental car, just the two of us, in Florida. We had a meeting at NASA, and we were driving back to the airport to get on his airplane to come back to LA. And I'm driving the car. He's sitting in the passenger seat, and I said, "Hey, boss, remember that time we're on TV and I compared you to Howard Hughes? You know, I just want you to know I was comparing you to the young, dashing, starlet dating Howard Hughes, not the old, decrepit, peeing in jars, fingernail guy."
It's all about the timeline. Yeah.
And I was, and all I got back was silence. And now I'm really scared, right? And I'm sitting there like waiting for him to say something. And Elon will do this. And he did this on your show, right? He kind of like, if you pose to him a serious question, he'll consider it. And he'll kind of go into this almost like a trance. He'll stare off into space, and you can see the wheels turn. And he's like focusing all of his intellect, which is considerable, on this one question. And that's what was happening. So I waited. And then he turned back to me and he said, "You know, Garrett, I don't think it's an apt comparison." I said, "Oh, okay. Good. Why? I'm curious, why do you think that?" And he said, "Well, none of Howard's designs, as brilliant as they were, ended up really changing the way we live our lives. So we don't send, like he made the Spruce Goose, which is an incredible airplane. It was all wood, you know, trying to solve the problem during the war of rationing. He said, we don't send our goods across the oceans in giant wooden airplanes. We don't do that. The H-1 Racer was a beautiful airplane, but it was a one-off. It never really led to a large designs that changed the way people live their lives." So that was his objection, was not that like I was comparing him to some creep, but that it's really important to him to have the legacy of drastically impacting the way all of us live our lives, of kind of the way Steve Jobs did or others that really move the ball downfield for humanity. That's what's driving.
Why does he care so much about Mars?
He believes in spacefaring. In other words, we have to be space adventurers for 2 or 3 reasons. One is he believes that human consciousness is rare and maybe unique. That nowhere else in the universe do we know that there's consciousness. And why? Because if consciousness existed somewhere else, it probably never became multiplanetary before the planet it was on got destroyed. It's not something you and I wake up worrying about, but it's a kid. There's a 15-year-old. He's worried about the extinguishing of human consciousness if something happens to our planet. Secondly, he says it's the great adventure. We wake up every morning, we got all sorts of problems to worry about. There are more problems in Ukraine to the Middle East to Congress to, whatever it may be at Whitehall at the moment. But we have to have our vision set on some things that inspire us, that are truly make humans what they are. And there's nothing more inspiring than the notion of being an adventurer, of going to new frontiers. And the greatest new frontier is space.
For all his grand visions, many keep predicting Elon's imminent downfall. After each turbulent launch, financial near-death experience, or controversial move, they declare this time he has flown too close to the sun. He has finally peaked. Is the Musk drama approaching its final act? Or is he still gaining momentum to reach new heights.
Are we in the final act of this kind of narrative? Has he peaked? Is he on the decline? I would say that for many years people have predicted his kind of the epic collapse of something, and he's been able to get through it. Is this just another example of that?
You know, throughout my book, we've got the epic collapse is about to happen. We have, as you know well, 2018, when Tesla and SpaceX are both having problems. Go back to 2008. They both run out of money at the end of that year. People say it's all over. Likewise, after he gets Twitter, he starts ripping out the servers and fires 85% of the team. I keep waking up in the morning thinking, this thing won't appear on my phone anymore. It's going to be gone. And taking on AI. It seems like he's doing it late after OpenAI and Google have done it. But at the moment, nothing's collapsed. Some of them are going to collapse. It's going to be like his rocket ships and everything else. He believes you can't get into orbit without blowing things up every now and then. So there will be debris, there will be things blown up. But I think, you know, most things he's done keep surprising me as being successful.
Is he happy?
No. He's somebody who not only is not usually happy, but he doesn't value happiness. If you said, what are the top 10 things you want in life? I don't think happiness, pleasure, calmness, sweetness, going to the beach, none of those would be in the top 10. Tallulah Riley, who was married to him, she said, he's not the type who can stop and savor or smell the flowers. He doesn't want to sit back and be content and be happy. And I asked him about it. I said, okay, are you ever happy at what you've achieved? He said, no, I'm like a video game addict. When I get to one level of the game and I've succeeded, all I can think about is moving to the next level of the game, be it Elden Ring or Polytopia.
Is demon mode Elon Musk's superpower? Is it equivalent to Steve Jobs' reality distortion field?
Can you take out the dark threads and still have the whole fabric? And it's true of Steve Jobs, which is he had a reality distortion field, and without that, he wouldn't have driven people crazy, but he wouldn't have driven people to do things they didn't think they could do. Likewise, there are times where this risk-taking, dark, I'm going to push ahead no matter what, personality is what it takes to, I mean, he's the only guy getting astronauts into orbit from the U.S. Only guy who can send up that many satellites, who can land a booster, who can bring us into the era of electric vehicles. That doesn't excuse demon mode, but as Shakespeare said, you know, we're molded out of our faults. If we pull that strand out, you might not get the whole cloth of Elon Musk.
Do you think some of the details about Elon Musk's life, that demon mode, might inspire a generation of wannabe entrepreneurs or wannabe an asshole? Or are there lessons here, though, that you think the future can take from the way Elon Musk operates?
Biographies are not how-to books. We don't have either the right to be that way, nor should they be that way. So I hope people come from the books on anybody and say, all right, I'm going to try to learn the lessons of what makes somebody effective, but I'm also going to learn the cautionary tales. You don't have to be this mean.
In the end, perhaps the greatest lesson from Elon's epic, flawed journey is that reaching the stars requires both light and shadow. That no simple verdict of hero or villain captures all its humanity and complexity. Rather than definitively labeling Elon as either hero or villain based on the full story, the most meaningful takeaway is recognizing the nuance that reaching heaven requires a taste for hell. History is filled with prominent figures who changed the world, some for good and others for worse. One of the most notorious figures is JP Morgan, considered by many as the most powerful man in America. If you haven't caught his story yet, just click right over here and I'll see you there soon. Thanks for watching.